crunch, bring it back, single leg swing. Let me teach you how to wrestle. Okay. Let me teach you how to wrestle.
Mindset Monday is brought to you by our official sponsors, Eat Clean, bro. Make sure you order today, get them delivered right to your house, check them out, and make sure you put in your discount code MINDSET.
And welcome back to Wrestling Mindset. Today we're here with repeat guests, some of Penn's finest, Ben Hatta, Yoshi Nakamura, talking about Clash of the Dynasties, St. Edward's versus Walsh Jesuit. Awesome having you guys. Really excited to talk about this. How's it going?
Great. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Look forward to chat with you guys. It's going to be fun.
Absolutely. So what was the inspiration for all this? I guess kind of obvious, but I guess take us a little bit deeper.
It started, as everything did probably for around this time was the pandemic, right? Coming up with just different ideas, how to, do things on your own, take on new challenges. And we decided to retell the story that happened 30 years ago between these two high schools. And the deeper we started to dig, in just this sports documentary, we started to realize there were a lot of, similarities between what was happening on both sides and a lot of other things happening besides the conflict on the mat. A lot of loss, a lot of personal loss, and just the story of, like what you guys are doing. When you fall, you got to get back up again, and you got to keep getting back up until you achieve what you want to do, And so we started to realize these other themes that were running through, and we just thought it would be a great, story to tell, and then also add to the legacy of the previous wrestling docu-stories that we've done, So, yeah.
And you go ahead, Yoshi.
And I'll tell you what, Ben hit the nail on the head. I mean, blood, sweat, tears, emotion, just the life, death, opportunities, loss. I mean, it takes you through every intense emotion, and it's an emotional roller coaster through the whole thing. And I remember being back in it. I argue that my path into it was a miracle, but the way, and I got to talk about my big brother Ben Hatta here, and I got to brag about him because he's too humble. The way he's woven this story together with human life and how important it is, and about really the story is about two ferocious rivals coming together at the end to battle, and then in the end together to celebrate that intensity and that moment of time and that greatness. Kudos to Ben Hatta, and I'd like to think that I'm somewhat qualified to make that statement. I've worked with Bennett Miller, who did Moneyball and Capote. I worked with Martin Scorsese's film team, Thelma Schoonmaker, who's a 3-time Oscar winner in film editing. And when you see the pieces that are put together here, and knowing that my big brother Ben Hatta has done this by himself, it's just brilliant. Really, it's a true masterpiece.
Oh, that's awesome. Really cool. And talk a little bit about more, because you guys lived it. Some St. Ed's finest right here. And I mean, these are two of the, perennial powerhouses, not only in the state, but in the country. Basically year in and year out for, I don't know how long, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years?
Yeah. I think people have said it before, when you're in, and, it's relatable to a lot of different things. When you're just in an intense moment like that goes on for a long period of time, you're not necessarily aware of a lot of the outside, pressures and expectations, just because you're in the trenches, right? You're in that battle, you're fighting constantly. And then when you step away from it, years later, you do start to realize that, wow, that was pretty amazing. And you look and you see that it hasn't necessarily happened that way again, and times have changed. And so that's why I thought it was interesting to go back in that time, and also put the viewer in that time period in the 90s, and surround them sort of with the news, the pop culture, the things that were happening, so they can remember what it was like. And then these were teenage kids, right? So that was another added element to it. We're adults talking about it now, but we were 14, 15, 16 going through all these different, expectations and elements outside of, our control that, had an impact and a force on our life and performance.
And okay, I guess the elephant in the room is, how do you make a documentary when you're coming from one side of it presenting the other side fairly and telling it from their point of view. Talk about that, the challenges there.
I mean, there's a lot of challenges. I've always, I think, from a lot of the previous projects and just the work through I've done in television, just been able to remove myself a lot from just the story, and kind of when you watch something 100 times, you know, and you're still looking for little pieces, you know, to buff off, you have to look at it with fresh eyes a lot of times. So I've trained myself in doing that, but this was a little bit more difficult because I was telling, you know, quote unquote, the enemy's story as well. So the first thing I did was have to, you know, get their blessing, permission, and help. Right. So I reached out to a bunch of guys that I knew around that time period, my age, and, you know, we all were brewing and talking about the possibilities of this story turning into a documentary. And then when I did reach out, they were more than glad to help out any way they could. And they kept me honest. They kept me, you know, that's not how it happened, or you could, you know, maybe take that out because that was a little too harsh, you know. So, and I think from what we've heard, there hasn't been any like that's not how it was, or, you know, that was unfair. Everyone said that from both sides that I think they were represented well. So that was our goal.
The only thing unfair was that Mike Kozicki and Yoshi Nakamura didn't get to wrestle in the last dual meet in 1997, and we lost to Walsh. That was I would have to say.
Hold on a second. Talk about that. Let's get that story on the record, and then let's make your comment.
So 1996-97 season, my senior year, right? I'm defending state champ, leading the charge of just an unbelievable like stable of young athletes. We got Mason Lenhart, Mark Jane, Ryan Bertine. We got Nick Nemeth. We got Gray Maynard. We got Michael Zicki. We got Andy Rollback, right?
Zach Thompson.
Zach was my junior year. This is my senior. So we go into the Ironman tournament 96-97, and we had lost, I think, Walsh and Blair the year before. And we go in and we just blow everybody out. First time we were ranked number one in the nation since 1992, was it, Ben? I think it was. And you know, literally, you know, we're on cloud nine. We're like, holy smokes, I won the Ironman tournament. I think the guy's name was Jimmy Hawthorne. I'm sitting in Virginia right now at one of my Bojangles stores, and I'm thinking about this guy from Virginia that I pinned in the finals, who actually wrestled for Blair. And it was just in a most amazing like period of time where like, holy smokes, we're doing it. We're bringing it back to the top. And then Mike Kozicki goes out he had a broken back. He didn't wrestle for the rest of the season until sectionals. We had another wrestler that became ineligible, Ryan Kinley. I think he won the Ironman tournament that year. And he ended up becoming ineligible. And then this was a weekend. It was just 2 weeks before the Walsh Jesuit dual meet. In the practice room, I had been having the most phenomenal season. I hadn't been scored on all season, hadn't been taken down, nothing. And I decided in practice, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do everything opposite side today, just because I can't be stopped. I'm going to do everything. I take a shot in practice in full go on my left side, and I rotate over my left knee. And I'm like, and I had already torn the cartilage of my knee when I was a sophomore, so I knew what it felt like. And my knee locked up, and I laid on the mat, and I go, oh my God, I just tore the cartilage of my knee. And I saw the doctor, Dr. Parker, who's the head of orthopedic surgery for Cleveland Clinic, who was our team doctor, on Tuesday, had an MRI Wednesday, had surgery Thursday. They got me back on the mat on Monday before the Walsh Jesuit meet that weekend. And the doctor said, listen, you can't hurt it anymore. You can't injure it anymore. It's going to hurt. He's like, but, you know, you're going to have to listen to your coaches, and you're going to have to manage that pain because, you know, if you want to get back on the mat, you got to do things the right way. Now, I had been begging Coach Urbis and Coach Hef to let me wrestle that weekend. And they're like, listen, and Coach is like, listen, I'll let you warm up. If you can drill, I'll let you warm up the team. I'll let you lead them out there. I'll let you weigh in at the weight class, because I was supposed to bump up and wrestle Joe Heskett, by the way, which would have been a pretty epic match for the dual meet. And so I'm like, I'm fired up. Like I'm ready to go. I get on, I get the team warmed. I go to weigh-ins. By the way, Bill Barger, when I'm weighing in, he's like looking down at my knee. He's like, hey, Yoshi. He's like, how you doing? I'm like, I'm doing great, coach. Oh man, I'm so fired up today. This is going to be an epic dual meet. And he's like looking at me like, huh? Didn't you just have me? He didn't say this, but I could see it in his head, because Bill was a quiet thinker when it came to strategy. So in his head, he's got these things twirling around. Like, why the hell is Yoshi on the scale weighing in, and his knee doesn't look like there's anything wrong with it. So I get off the scale and I jog out of the room, and everybody's kind of looking at me. Anyways, make a long story longer. I get upstairs, I warm up the team, give the fired up speech. We go out there, we shake hands, and we get to 145. Gray Maynard goes out there, it's his guy, right? And we're like, holy smokes. I'm like, we're close. I'm like, we can do this. I take off all my gear, put my singlet up, put my headgear on, and I start bouncing. I just had this rush of energy. I felt nothing but just go. And Coach Urbis and the rest of the coaches put their arms on me. And I remember Coach Urbis whispering to me, he goes, don't even think about it. States is most important. And I literally, my heart just went. And now Joe Heskett, he had a closer match with Ryan Fair than probably should have, because Joe obviously was a pretty phenomenal pinner. We ended up losing the dual meet by 3 points. We had 3 people out. And I do think about that moment where if I just ran out there and wrestled Joe, it could have happened. But you know what? Life happens for a reason, and we weren't supposed to win that dual meet. But the way Ben's told that story, and just the decade of championship competition is it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing to be a part of.
That's awesome. Ben, any of your memories from that? And then Yoshi, go back to what you were going to say, commenting on what Ben said before, if you remember.
I'll let Ben go first. Sorry.
I mean, there's a lot of memories. I think that's what it's fun to hear these guys talk about it, because it is so fresh to a lot of these guys. It's 30 years ago, it's 3 decades, right? But they still remember these losses that affected them because of how immense the situation was. Zach Thompson versus Jeff Knupp. Jeff Knupp went on to Penn State. He was one of the most highly recruited. He was like the second recipient of the Dave Schultz Achievement Award. And they had a double overtime match in our 94 dual meet in front of like 3,000 fans at Walsh Jesuit. And ESPN was there. And it was they were 14 and 15-year-old kids, right? So I was there in that dual meet at that moment, and just the crowd. Like I look at these, Bo Bassett wrestled in Super 32s a couple months ago, and the crowd that he had in that match and in the finals, and how everyone was circle around and kids were like right on the edge. And, the view that I saw was like looking down, and all the bleachers were full. And even the part that didn't have bleachers, people were just gathered up on it. And that's what those matches were like every year. And so like, those are those atmospheres I remember. And I remember one of my first matches at Penn, we wrestled Navy. And I was a freshman, and I was a 118 pounder, and it was my first match out. And at Navy, every midshipman is required to go to a sporting event every weekend to support their fellow, students. And we just happened to be the only home event that weekend. So every single midshipman piled into the gymnasium, and it was maybe 3,000 people in their pea coats and their hats, and there wasn't enough room, so they just surrounded the mat. And I went out there, and I was the first match, and I could just tell the hesitation and some of the excitement and maybe fear in some of my teammates. And I remember just going back to those matches, and I remember wiping the mat with that kid. It was interesting because they didn't necessarily know the sport. Every time, like I was on bottom at one point, and I stood up, and the guy lifted me and back down, and the whole crowd just cheered, and it was intimidating because it was so, loud. But again, I didn't let that disrupt what I was out there to do, because I'd been in that environment before. So that's one of those moments I take with me, because it was just, so energetic.
So my introduction to the St. Ed's Walsh Jesuit dual meet was when I was a freshman. So remember, I really didn't wrestle until I got to high school. And Ben Hatta's dad, Coach Tadaki Hatta, was the reason I got into wrestling. When my father died, he said, my father asked Coach Hatta to take care of me. And obviously Ben and Robert were great big brothers to me, but they got me into wrestling my freshman year. So the first Walsh Jesuit St. Edward dual meet that I had ever been a part of was Ben's senior year. Now I was also very fortunate that Ben showed me the ropes. He was my drill partner. But I remember, so I'm like all in on Ben Hatta. I'm like, come on, you can do it. Now he's wrestling Adam Plus, defending state champion. Adam was just a son of a bitch. I'm just a tough motherfucker. And I'm like, Ben, you can do this, man. You can do this. And Ben goes out there, and he scraps. And he scraps. And all of a sudden, boom, gets him on his back, headlocks him, puts him to his back. I'm jumping up. Now I'm behind the bench. I jump up on the chairs, folding chairs. I'm jumping up and down on the folding chairs. My leg slips through the folding chair, folds up on my leg like this, and I'm screaming. I got one chair on my leg. Oh my God. It was one of the most exciting matches. And from that day, I was like, I'm going to be in this match. And to this day, all 4 years, I missed that match all 4 years. Because obviously I didn't start as a freshman behind Eddie Jane. My sophomore year, I had a concussion. My junior year, the referee died. I don't know if you remember that one, but the referee died on the mat. So we didn't get the rest of that one. And we were on track to win that match. And then my senior year, I injured my knee. So it was very unfortunate to sit back and watch that. I will say my only taste of the Walsh Jesuit St. Edward rivalry was when I got to wrestle, who's now my good friend of mine, Sonny Marchetti. I wrestled him in the East-West All-Star meet. And I did beat him in overtime. So, unfortunately, I didn't get to wrestle Joey, but I did get to wrestle Sonny, and I did walk away with the victory. But I would say it was a pretty even match. And, one other thing Ben exudes when it comes to this, and I think the reason he is able to tell an epic story like this is because it's about respect, right? It's respect as warriors. It's respect as rivals. And Ben respects and appreciates the story that these guys came up and grew up in. And if you don't have that level of respect, you can't take yourself out of the situation to write that type of story, to produce or direct that type of story. Ben has such a magical talent for that. And I think it's a lot goes back to the Japanese culture and just respect. And I think in general, the whole world needs to learn a little more respect for each other. But I think Ben really takes that to a whole nother level when he goes in and dives into these stories.
That's awesome. Really good. And it's so important. You're right. We do need a lot more respect. You said about your team and all the hammers you had and that you guys lost to Walsh Jesuit that year. Who was on the team again? And then the next question is who was on Walsh Jesuit at that time?
It was Mason Lenhart, Mark Jane.
This is saying okay, so let's go through because I've read people are out of state too.
Yeah. Mason Lenhart, Mark Jane, Ryan Bertine, 2 3-time state champs, and then a 2-time national champion at Ryan Bertine. That's the first three weight classes. We had Mike Kozicki, Mike Tolar, both state champs. Mike Kozicki was a 2-time state champ. We had Gray Maynard, state champ for Vegas, state champ for Ohio, UFC top contender. We had multiple-time All-American. We had Andy Rovat, myself.
The time is now to take your mindset to the next level with Wrestling Mindset. Make sure you go to our website, wrestlingmindset.com, and sign up for your free trial session today. Don't wait any longer. You want the mental edge right now. When you sign up for the free trial session, you're also going to get a copy of our free ebook, Building the Predator Mindset. This book has helped thousands of people build confidence, relax under pressure, get motivated, and build mental toughness in wrestling, school, and life. Make sure you sign up for your free trial session today.
Ryan Fair, who went to Columbia. And then we had Jeremy Orski, and I'm trying to think of those. Am I missing anybody? Nick Nemeth was on that team too. Yeah, he wrestled 140 that match. Nick Nemeth was Dolph Ziggler, famous WWE wrestler. We were stacked. And remember, in that dual meet, we were missing 3 people in that lineup. Me, Kozicki, and then another gentleman named Ryan Kinley, who unfortunately was ineligible at the time. And then one time was pretty stacked too.
Yeah, what Yoshi's not mentioning is that like that team, Mark Jane, All-American, Gray Maynard, All-American, Andy Rovat, All-American, Olympian, Ryan Bertine, 2-time national champ, Yoshi Nakamura, All-American. Though there was one year in college that 3 of those guys, Yoshi, right. Gray, and Bertine, were All-Americans in the same weight class.
Yeah, and the crazy thing, we didn't wrestle each other, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. We didn't wrestle each other either.
But then you look at Walsh Jesuit, and they had Sonny Marchetti, they had Joe Heskett, they had Jeff Knupp, Victor Svita, they had Scott Mitchell, they had Brent Thompson, I think, was on that team that year. Was it Frank Favaro, Keith Rowling?
Frank, I think Frank
graduated in '96.
Yeah, they graduated the year before. Right. Yeah, but that still was a stacked team. It's still stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you got a national champ in Joe Heskett. You've got All-American in Victor Svita. Yep. You've got a junior national college champ in Sonny Marchetti. Yep. And then at one point at Iowa State, you had Sonny Marchetti, Joe Heskett, and Zach Thompson all on the same team, right? So it was, I mean, just the output of, I mean, that's just one dual meet, right? You're not mentioning Marcus Malika in the early 90s and Rick Hepp, who went at it, and they were, they had 7 national All-American honors between the two of them and 2 national titles. And then, Roger Chandler, right? And then all those guys that went on to be coaches, Roger Chandler, Michael Zickby, Mark Jane, so that's not mentioning everyone that, that Yoshi mentioned, like Nick Nemeth being a WWE superstar and all these different avenues. So yeah, it was just the output, and like we're trying to get people to realize that this isn't just a story about St. Ed's and Walsh Jesuit. If you cheered for Michigan or Michigan State or Illinois or Arizona State or Penn State during those times, you were cheering for a Walsh and an Ed's guy, and they went on to be All-Americans for those schools. That this is a wrestling story, and then it becomes bigger than that once you get inside out the wrestling community. That becomes a human story. It becomes a documentary film lover story, right? Because of just the gravity of what was going on at that time.
It's interesting too. That rivalry would have extended. Very interesting. And Ben does a good job of telling this part of the story too in the documentary. Walsh Jesuit chose to go co-ed. And at the time, Coach Urban said it in the documentary, we thought they were expanding and opening the school up to girls. In actuality, what happened was they took away boys' spots to bring girls in. And so what happened was they moved to Division II. And that was really the step function down. I know Bill Barger's brother references that it really cut Bill's legs out from underneath him, because he was like, I want to be at the best. By the way, all of us are looking at it. We're like, we want to compete with Walsh Jesuit. We don't want them to be Division II. We want them to be Division I. We would see them at the tournaments, but the Division I state tournament is what it was all about. And that number 1, number 2 rivalry. It was a very interesting seismic shift in that school and what happened to the boys program at the time. I'm one of the biggest proponents, the biggest supporters of women's wrestling. Sally Roberts is out there doing a great job of growing the sport, but it was actually really sad. I actually didn't know that until Ben had told this story, that they had removed spots for the boys to go into school, and that hurt a lot of these North Akron wrestling kids, because listen, they worked hard to get eligible and stay in school, but not all of them had the upbringings that Ben had or I had, where academics was really at a very high level, and so it was kind of unfortunate. And I think the rivalry could have lasted a lot longer, but it lasted as long as it should have lasted for us to tell this story. And that decade was a pretty tremendous decade.
Awesome. Now, just to keep going with the list now, of all time, if you could name some of the hammers from St. Ed's of all time, as well as some of the hammers from Walsh Jesuit, I could see us snipping up this clip and kind of running through each, so gets that word out there. So each of them, yeah.
Early on, you've got Jim Heffernan.
Which team first?
Okay, we're talking about St. Ed's. I'll go through the St. Ed's list of just hammers. You've got, in the early days, you got Jim Heffernan, who was an NCAA champ. This guy named Jim Mason, who was an NCAA All-American. Greg Alinsky, who was the first 4-time NCAA All-American for Penn State. Alan Freed, who was an NCAA champion. Then you get into the Roger Chandlers, and this is just from our film. Roger Chandler, NCAA finalist. Rick Hepp, 3-time NCAA All-American. Yoshi Nakamura, NCAA, 2-time NCAA All-American. Sam Niter, NCAA All-American. Zach Thompson, NCAA finalist, NCAA All-American. Again, Mark Jane, Ryan Bertine, 2-time NCAA champion. Gray Maynard, UFC finalist. Andy Rovat, All-American and Olympian. Mason Leonard, he was a 4-time, I think, NCAA, or he was a 2-time NCAA qualifier. And just that list for just St. Ed's, and that's not talking about the ones that came
Ben Hatta, EIWA champ.
That's right, baby.
That's not talking about the Ryan Langs, the Dean Hiles, all the ones that came after, but then you go to Walsh and you've got, early on was Don Horning. He was an All-American, 2-time All-American for Kent State. And then Marcus Malika was a 2 to 4-time NCAA All-American, 2-time NCAA champion for Arizona State. And then Clint Musser was a NCAA finalist for Penn State. And then you've got all these guys that went to Ohio State. Jimmy Johnson, I think he was Big Ten Freshman of the Year at Ohio State. And Jeff Nutt ended up going to Penn State. I think he was a 3-time state champion, but he won, I think, 2 national champions at juniors. And then Victor Svita was an NCAA All-American. Sonny Marchetti was a junior college national champion. Joe Heskett was multiple All-American, world team member. And, you know, a lot of people forget about Joe because he was like in lineup behind Cale Sanderson, but he was a finalist, right? Boom, boom, boom. It was back to back. So like just that alone, and that's not including really what came before and what came after that decade. Just that alone is just, you know, amazing for the awards that came out, you know, from that decade. And it's funny because Yoshi mentioned it before, we were going to call it the 10-year war because it lasted a long time. It wasn't just a one-time thing, and we were in each other's backyards. And it did, I think, respect was sort of felt throughout because we had gone through this shared experience. We had looked across the battlefield and saw family members passing away on the other side, or they looked across and saw teammates passing away on our side. And, you know, when you can look back on it, it does feel like soldiers coming together, you know, years later and patting each other on the back and just happy that we're still alive, you know, and that, you know, we had that shared experience that maybe no one has, and maybe won't happen for a while, you know, just because that time period, the intensity and just what you could get away with in wrestling at that point, you know?
You know, Ben, if I could tell that story we had with me and Sonny in the interview, I think it just kind of hits home with what you're saying. You know, in 2020 when COVID hit, I was supposed to launch my own business, and you know, Knocker Capital Partners ended up eventually getting launched, and you know, we own a bunch of Bojangles down in Virginia Beach and Norfolk, Suffolk, and Portsmouth. So any of those wrestling tournaments, please come visit. But I went through a really dark time because of what happened, and I failed on 3 or 4 deals, trying to close deals for my company, and I eventually made an acquisition, and this was the acquisition I made. But my head wasn't clear. My head's still not 100% clear. And when I was watching a documentary for the first time, you know, Ben gave me a sneak preview to give him some feedback. And we got to the part where he talked about Sonny Marchetti and he talked about me. And I remember Sonny's father dying, and that's why he went from North Akron to Walsh. But when I thought about that, and then he told my story about how my father died when I was 13 and Sonny was 15, I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, we're kind of, and I'm thinking of the parallel path of what we were on, what we were doing. I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, we both kind of have the same mindset. And, you know, if anybody knows the warrior mindset, you guys do at Wrestling Mindset. But that said, I said, I can't really talk to a lot of people about the things that are in my head or in my heart because I don't think people fully understand or can understand. You know, when you go through what we've been through with what my dad did with me in judo, what Sonny's dad did with him in wrestling, our mindset is very, very molded and warped into a way that which it's not comprehensible. So I was still struggling with a lot of things mentally, even though I had a successful business. I said, you know what? Son of a bitch. I'm gonna pick up the phone and call Sonny. I haven't talked to him in a year. I'm just gonna call him, see how he's doing, because my head is a little. And he picks up the phone. He goes, Yoshi, what? Hey, what's up, man? What's going on? I go, dude. I was like, I just watched this documentary. I got a sneak preview. I was like, I saw the part about your dad and my dad. And I said, man, I've been through a lot of dark shit the last 4 years. I said, and if we're anything alike, I was like, I had this feeling that maybe you kind of were going through some similar stuff. He goes, dude, he's cut me up. He goes, dude, you have no idea how important this phone call is to me right this very second. He goes, I don't answer the phone anymore. I've been in a dark place. And he's like, I needed this phone call. And I don't know why I picked it up, but something in my heart told me to pick it up. And we spoke for 2.5 hours about real shit and about shit that we've been through, probably shit that we've never told other people, haven't told our wives in some cases. And dude, we took pictures. I was like, dude, I have goosebumps. He goes, I have goosebumps. And we literally snapped pictures of our goosebumps on our arm and we sent them to each other. I'm like, holy shit. That's like, we got to keep talking. And it made me realize, and this is awesome what you guys do, the Wrestling Mindset, but guys like us, warriors like us, and it could be men and women, but warriors like us need warriors like us to talk to. And that is super, super important. And I think there are a lot of people out there, a lot of men especially, struggling with being able to communicate some of those deep down things that only men will understand. And I'm not saying wives don't understand. I'm not saying moms don't understand. I'm not saying that women don't understand. I am saying that there are things that warriors like us understand better than anybody else. And so I highly encourage people to reach out to their friends, whether you know they're struggling or not. Just reach out and say hi, man. If their name pops into your head, call them. I think more people need it right now than less. And I'm telling you, that's the kind of stuff that this documentary created. It created a healing as well of things that people didn't even know were out there. And looking in the eyes of the guys that were there at that documentary, watching the previews or watching the films, I could see a lot of that in there. And there were a lot of hugs. You know, there's a lot of tears too, believe it or not. A lot of tough guys. I'll tell you what, if anybody made fun of us, we'd have cleared out any venue, any city that we were in at that point in time. So I wasn't worried about anybody making fun of us, but it was good. It was a real brotherhood of warriors coming together.
Oh yeah. And it's one of those things where even if you're coming from opposing sides, you realize you have more in common with one another than people that go to the same school as you, because you've been through it. They haven't been through it. You know, the parents, the girlfriends, they haven't, but you lived it and they lived it. So there's that brotherhood, even though we were, you know, foes on the mat, like we're 99% alike really here.
Yep.
It's huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and to speak on what Yoshi was saying about a couple things about one, mindset, and what you guys do, and what Gene, you and I were speaking to earlier about, you know, you guys are growing, you're getting coaches all over the country, but then you've also got people who are, you know, emulating what you're doing, copying what you're doing, trying to be what you guys have done. And that at first, you know, it's intimidating because you're like, you know, you're copying me. But then at some point you're like, well, go ahead. As long as you're getting the word out there and you're doing it properly. And that is you know, a huge element of this story, is that, you know, the way that these two dynasties came about were because these two men were, Coach Ferguson for St. Ed's and Coach Barger for Walsh Jesuit, were emulating and copying what someone else had done prior to them and had been successful. So Howard Ferguson was copying what Dan Gable was doing in Iowa. He turned that practice room into a mini Iowa in the 80s. Like, we had to wear gray shirts and black shorts in practice, all of us. And if you didn't, you had to do some sort of punishment. But that's what Iowa was wearing in their practice room. He changed the singlets from green and gold to black and gold and put the little gold stripes at the bottom, because that's how Iowa was dressing. And he became friends with Dan, and he would bring Iowa wrestlers to teach technique to St. Ed's. And then he would encourage the St. Ed's guys when they graduated to go to Iowa. So both Heffernan, Jim, and John went to Iowa. A guy named Bubba Strauss ended up going to Iowa. And then Bill Barger, when he saw what Ferguson was doing when they started winning championship after championship in the 80s, he was like, well, what are you doing? How are you doing this? And Bill Barger, or Coach Ferguson, was like, well, here's what I did. Here's the playbook. And he literally gave him St. Ed's wrestling plans, takedown manual, their practice schedule, who they were going to wrestle, how they, you know, all their techniques, and was like, go, here you go, do it. And so Bill started copying St. Ed's. He would go to every single tournament they were at. He started wearing black singlets with gold stripes. You know, he did everything he could to copy what a champion was doing, and he did it. Then the formula is there. It's just, like, you know, it's hard to do. Right. But if you do it and you grind at it and you have the proper formula and got people around you who are helping and supporting you and filling in the gaps that you don't necessarily excel at, then you can be a champion. Right. And so the through line, a lot of this story is that, you know, don't be afraid to ask for help, but then don't be afraid to go out and, you know, challenge someone to challenge you to be better. And, you know, at the end of the day, what it does, and what we all reference, is that iron sharpens iron. You know, in order to be a champion, you got to beat a champion. And once you're at the top, what else is there? You know, you got to have more challengers. You've got to have someone scrapping at your feet to keep you on your toes and being the best. And so I think that the decade that we tell is that decade between Eds and Walsh. But there's other decades, like when Blair came on the scene, Tipson, when Yoshi was talking about in 97, they were the next dynasty that started to peek their head in. and they were watching what Walsh and Eds were doing. And then they started showing up to the Ironman and winning it, and then building and doing that same sort of process. So there's a bunch of great contenders now. We would love to see those dynasties rekindled, regardless of what school they're from, what part of the country, as long as they can get, at each other. That was I think the anomaly with us is we're just in each other's backyard, so
everybody's shooting for another Christian school in State College called Faith Christian. Sounds like there's a filter program at State College at Penn State going on.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it too, is that, instead of looking at it just at the high school level, looking at the college level, everyone is shooting for Penn State, right? And so you've got these other programs that are building, like Iowa and Arizona State and Iowa State and, these Ivy League programs that their goal is that we're trying to take out, Oklahoma State, we're trying to take out Penn State. That's their mission. That was Bill Barger's mission. I want to take this team down. How do I do it? I'm going to start building the infrastructure. I'm going to start building the plan to do it. And this is how I can do it. And he did it. And it's just amazing. And then he was not just did it once, but he was able to sustain it and keep it. And that's how you create a dynasty. Once off is not a dynasty, right? So, and then being able to get it back, St. Ed's being able to get back off the mat and crawl back up and, take advantage of, situations that, got them in, back to where they were. So, I think there's a lot of different themes that are running through than just sort of, two wrestling teams going at it.
Absolutely. Anything else you guys wanted to share or add that we didn't talk about yet?
No, I think another thing, again, like what you guys are doing, in that mindset area is, setting your goals high. Don't, limit what you can or can't do, but also the act of giving back. These coaches gave their lives, and some prayed when their life was on the line to save them so they could give back. Bill Barger, his story started in Vietnam in '69 when he was shot and pinned down, and he said, "God, please help me get out of this, and I will help the youth. I will do something to help youth." And he just had to figure out what it was, and it turned out to be wrestling. But he came through on that, pledge to God. So he gave back, and every single one of these coaches, it wasn't about them. They always were they might've been the face, but they were not like the guys seeking the spotlight. They were all about the kids. They were all about making these young men the best they were. And Bill was one of those guys, I keep referencing, he was the original Beat the Streets. He took these kids from hard neighborhoods that didn't maybe have a path out and taught them the sport of wrestling and fueled that anger and aggression and energy towards a goal and a sport, and got them into college and got them into better lives. And so I think we need more stories like that. I think we need more people like that. And when we find them, we need to glorify them and keep encouraging, that. So keep up the great work with what you're doing, because it is all about a mindset. It's about accomplishing goals, setting goals, and then achieving them, and then giving back and helping other people achieve their goals as well.
And I'd stick with the message of my family values, which are my, core values, which are my business values, which are my anything values. Be a good person, do the right thing. Set your goals high, work hard to achieve them. Respect people in their culture, and be kind and be brave. And, I think the world today seems to have lost their respect and kind of value-based approach to life. And if you keep those values very simple and straightforward, they apply to everything. And, I apply it to my business here. I have a great team, great business leaders, great partners and investors that are part of this. But they all believe in the value-based approach that I take, which means they believe in me, which means they believe in my family. And when you have that type of network and belief, sky's the limit. And, I would say, no matter what, tell yourself every day that you can, and you will, and then get your ass up and start working at it. And that's very, very important. That was one thing that I struggle with. As much as I felt like I've accomplished because I did those things, you can get lost along the way. Shit gets hard in life. And as tough as you think you are, it might be tougher than you for a short period of time. But don't quit. Don't stop. Get your ass up. Tell yourself you can, and you will, and then go fucking do it.
Awesome. Clash of the Dynasties. We want everyone to check it out. St. Edward's versus Walsh Jesuit. Great stuff coming from you know, a great man, and everything you guys do for the sport of wrestling. Thank you. We really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us in this.
Awesome. Love it.
Absolutely. Thank you for all you do as well for the sport. Keep spreading the word.
Absolutely. Take care.